From Wana Brands, welcome to Enhance Your Life. I'm your host, Jonathan Small, and each week I talk to people from all sorts of professions and backgrounds about how cannabis has enhanced their lives and how this healing plant can enrich your life too. Hey everybody, welcome to the Enhance Your Life podcast. My name is John Small and I am your host. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show. My guest today is Jeffrey Graham, who is the CEO of Pistol Data. And Jeffrey is also a blues musician, a weed connoisseur, and a data nerd. He is the former head of data analytics and research at Twitter, Google, and the New York Times, my old job. And when Jeffrey saw firsthand the potential and power of harnessing data for business intelligence, he was intrigued. So 3 years ago, he made the leap into the cannabis world to found Pistol Data, and he became a first-time entrepreneur at the age of 50. That's awesome. So why did he make the switch to cannabis, and what can Pistol Data tell us about the way people consume weed? I had to find out. So I've got Jeffrey on the line. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
So great to have you here. First of all, a little background. So what is a kind of Silicon Valley nerd like you doing in this crazy cannabis business?
Well, I as you mentioned in the intro, I've seen the power of data to grow industries. I was involved in the internet industry and saw that really explode. When you look at companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter, ultimately they're data businesses more than anything else. And even older industries like the Gray Lady, New York Times, I led research there and saw how data could really help them transform into what now is very much a digital business, a subscription business.
For sure.
So cannabis, I think, is a social good for the world. And certainly the legalization and providing and making available safe cannabis across the world is something that's really important, and also represents a huge opportunity, business opportunity. So when I thought about what I could do next, and when I saw the opportunity to apply data to cannabis, I thought it was the perfect combination.
And it's amazing, you know, at the age of 50, it's pretty scary to jump on the deep end and just become an entrepreneur. So you must feel pretty passionately about this, but about both data and the cannabis business and the cannabis industry. What's your own personal experience with cannabis?
Well, like a lot of people, I use cannabis to give myself some degree of comfort from a perspective of pain and sleep. And we can talk about some of the research, but that's a very common use of cannabis, particularly among older people. But as you mentioned, I'm also a musician, and music, particularly improvisational music, really depends on being very present and being in a flow state. So I play jazz, and jazz, you don't really know which note you're going to play from one note to the next.
Yeah.
It just kind of comes to you, and also is an experience where you're listening and you're collaborating and you're in a groove with other people. That's what makes great jazz music, is a groove and this flow. And I found that cannabis can really unlock that flow really well. And so it's a really powerful complement to some of the things that I like to do in my personal life.
Yeah, let's dig a little bit deeper into that experience of flow and jazz, because I've heard this from jazz musicians. I had an Uber driver just recently. We were talking about him, jazz. He was a jazz musician, and he's saying that I really find it very beneficial before shows to smoke a little, because it just helps clear my head, and I'm able to hear as you said, the improvisation. I'm able to just be a lot freer. What is your experience in terms of that? Like, what is the experience of being a bit high when you're playing? Like, does it kind of quiet the mind in some ways? Are you able to hear a little differently?
It's a hard thing to put into words, because I do think that music is something that is a different world than the world of words.
Yeah.
That's what makes it special. So there's a magic to it, and tapping into that magic is something that's ineffable. It's hard to really
Articulate. Yeah.
bring down. Yeah, but I'd say in other words that I think would be useful to explain it is focus.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that you need to be in the present moment, and you need to be in a place where you're not only creating, but you're letting things unfold. And there's something about the plant that helps bring me to that state. Now, of course, I play music without using cannabis, and I've used cannabis without playing music.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things I think that can bring me to that state sometimes a little bit more clearly.
Yeah. And I find a lot of jazz musicians, as I said, I mean, Louis Armstrong famously consumed cannabis. Many of the great jazz. There used to be a word for cannabis back in the day, mez, because there was one jazz musician, I can't remember his full name, but it started with Mez something, who was like kind of the dealer.
Got it.
Right. And they all called it the Mez. We need that Mez. But so, yeah, and I find that experience too in writing. As a writer, sometimes when I write under the influence of cannabis, it quiets a lot of the doubts that I have, or the sort of that negative kind of voice in my head that tells me, this sucks. And in some ways it's great because you get into a flow, and the other way is, I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever written in my life. And then the next day I look at it and I'm like, it wasn't that great. It
Nice.
feels like when you're writing, it's the greatest thing you've ever, it makes writing fun a lot of times.
Well, as a musician, almost all the time, there's no review the next day.
Yeah.
So if
It either went well or
if you feel like, and if you are lucky enough to have an audience, if you're experiencing, wow, this is the most amazing thing that's happening right now, the audience is going to pick up on that. And so maybe unlike writing, you don't have to go and face a different reality the next day. It's, it happened and it was gone.
So you have the advantage of looking at all this data of cannabis consumers, the way people buy cannabis, the way people consume cannabis. I would love to kind of unpack that a little bit and understand that a little bit more. What exactly does your data show, and who is your data for?
Well, when I first started in the cannabis industry about 3 years ago as head of business intelligence for a cannabis company, I thought there would be a lot of information and data about cannabis. And we can talk a little bit about kind of the market data, for people to make decisions. But I was also really interested in just understanding, as somebody who's like just studied products in the past, you have some basic questions like who's using it, why are they using it, what benefit are they getting, what do they prefer, standard questions about a product. And despite the fact that hundreds of millions of people use this product around the globe and risk jail time to do it, I found that cannabis had been primarily studied as a social problem and not a consumer product. So, there was organizations that were really focused on crime or addiction or, regulation. They had studied it, but studied it from the lens of, oh my goodness, this is a problem for us and we need to understand it. So actually I did some research when I was at this company. We did a survey of something like 1,400 people, asking some really basic questions that there hadn't been information about. And one of the things that I found most interesting was the question of why people use cannabis. And what I think from a perception perspective is most people, even if they don't think that cannabis is some terrible, life waster, they generally associate cannabis with fun, with going to music concerts, with hang out with the park or that type of thing, because that's where cannabis is visible.
Right. The recreational use, as they call it.
Exactly. The recreational, even the words in the industry reflect that kind of misnomer of or misunderstanding of what used primarily. But what we found is that 84% of people that use cannabis specifically report using it for either sleep, pain reduction, or reducing anxiety and depression. The most popular choice was to help me relax. which is fairly ambiguous because relaxation is certainly important to be healthy. But 61% of people said they used it to help them sleep, 56% to relieve pain, and almost half to relieve emotional symptoms like anxiety and depression. So these aren't always acknowledged as why people are using cannabis, but you see just how important they are, important the plant is to help people live lives without stress and pain.
Yeah, I mean, cannabis is medicine, and many people use it as medicine. And you're right, the media and just the popular sort of stigmas around it are really different than the reality. And so I'm glad to hear that. What ways do people consume? I mean, does it differ from state to state? My understanding is that it's still the most popular way to consume cannabis is still flower, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is from the good old days when that was the only way you could really consume cannabis.
Right.
Is that still what you find?
Yeah. Now, flower is the number one type of product. Pre-rolls are sometimes classified separately, but that's also part of it. Basically, combustion, burning, the plant. But edibles are also a fairly substantial part. Things like gummies, which are easy to take. Some people don't like to smoke stuff at all, which is understandable. And then there's other types of combustible products like concentrates and things like that can be really strong and really effective for some people. I think we have to look at all of that, though, understanding that the cannabis market still primarily is a legacy market, meaning the people that use cannabis are people that have been using it for a long time. And flower is the main thing that's been available. Flower is what people have learned to appreciate.
Yep.
Flower is something that's been really readily accessible. So I would expect over time things changing. So the recent study by Gannett found that 52% of people that use cannabis have reduced prescription drug use.
Wow.
49% reduced their over-the-counter painkiller use. So what people are using it for, is replacing other things in other form factors. And I would expect over time, people finding different ways to get a very consistent experience and response, that it doesn't have to be flower.
Yeah. Let's talk about edibles for a moment. Have you seen in your research an uptick in the amount of people year over year who purchase and consume edibles?
That has been a category that's been growing fairly consistently, not dramatically, but fairly consistently. I think overall, what a lot of people struggle with, particularly people that are relatively new to cannabis, is that they want the thing that they're using or taking, or whatever word you want to use, they want it to do the same thing to them every time.
Consistency.
Exactly. And that's sometimes easiest to find in a product like gummies. And gummies also tend to be, there are large brands that have very high penetration. There's some gummy brands that are in 80 to 90% of stores in any given state. So you can find them. There's only 5 or 6 different flavors. And then the experience tends to be a lot more uniform than flower, which from one strain to the next, from one brand to the next, can often have very different impact on people. So I think that gummies really represents a category where people are looking for not only discrete type of consumption, but also something like, hey, I just want to go to sleep. Yeah. And if I take it and I stay up all night, that's going to drive me away. So I like this thing. It works every time. I'm going to stick with it.
It makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Consistency. And that's been the challenge, and also the great accomplishment of a lot of cannabis companies is figuring out how to make that consistent dose the same every time, and make you have the same effect every time you drink a glass of wine. You kind of know how you're going to feel after drinking that glass of wine. It's a similar experience. You take a few aspirin, you kind of know how you're going to feel after you take that aspirin, and you know, you don't have to switch it up every time. And I find it harder to control the effects when you're consuming sometimes through burning than a controlled dose through a gummy. Do you find that the consumption habits are different depending on what generation we're talking about? Like, my assumption is going to be that if you're, as you said, it's a legacy thing, the flower thing. So if you are over 50, you are probably more likely to smoke flower because that's what you've done your whole life. But I'm just making that up. But do you find that there's different consumption habits as you look at the different generations?
I think the first thing to say is that people of all walks of life use cannabis.
Yeah.
Men, women, old, young. It's like one of the most democratic products that exist.
It's also one of the ones that Republicans and Democrats actually mainly agree on.
Yeah.
Well, as far not politicians, but people
right.
who identify as Republican.
Pretty much, yes. Yeah. So overwhelmingly, people want to legalize cannabis, and politicians haven't yet figured out how to make that happen. So overall, it's a product that a lot of people want to use. There tend to be differences between people that have been using for a really long time, and those people tend to gravitate towards flower. Sometimes those people also have higher tolerances, so they may gravitate towards concentrates and things like that, and they may be consuming a lot more often. The main differences that you see between older and younger people is just simply what you're using it for. Mm-hmm. And if you're older, someone like me that starts to have some aches and pains and have trouble falling asleep, then you may more likely use it for that purpose. Whereas younger people tend to, although there's a strong use case for anxiety and depression for sure, they tend to use it for more what you're classically the recreational purposes.
Right. That's interesting. Who are your clients? Are they the brands that are making these products and growing these products? Are they the companies that are selling the products? Both? Like, who needs this information?
Yeah. Well, if you're lucky enough to live in a legal state and you walk into a few dispensaries, you may be overwhelmed by the number of brands, the number of different types of products. You may, if you go to the same dispensary a few times in a row, you may also see that there's a lot of changing of brands and, different brands on the shelf. It's very chaotic. It's very complicated. There are literally more than 3 million different cannabis products for sale in the United States, which is pretty crazy.
And that's in the legal market.
That's in the legal market. But when you think about even brands of craft beer, there's nowhere near that amount in terms of orders of magnitude. So just as it's confusing for a consumer, it's also confusing if you work for a brand and you're trying to get your product on that retail shelf, just keeping track of, wait, who sells my product? Who sells my competitor's product? Hey, I just shipped them 100 pre-roll packs. Are they out of stock? Are they not out of stock? They spend a lot of time driving around, looking at online menus, trying to figure all of that out. Yeah. Very confusing. So what we've done is we've created a service for cannabis brands and manufacturers to basically make some sense out of those retail opportunities and make their jobs as salespeople a little bit easier, so they know where their products are, where they may be out of stock, where there may be opportunities to find stores that are more likely to stock their products.
Got it. Your service is available in most legal states and also in Canada?
Right now, we're available in 7 states. We just rolled out 5 last quarter. We'll be in another 10 and possibly Canada by the end of the quarter, depending on how fast we can go.
Right. I have to, since you worked at Twitter, I have to get your take on what's going on at Twitter right now. Do you mind talking about that?
No, I don't mind at all.
What do you think of Elon Musk? It's not official as we record this, but it's looking likely that he might take over Twitter. What is your take on that? Knowing the culture of Twitter, knowing how Twitter works, is this a good thing for Twitter or a bad thing for Twitter? Neutral?
Well, this is my personal take on it. For the people that work at Twitter, many of whom I know really, really well, the fact that Elon Musk, the day after the deal was announced, decided he was going to try to humiliate one of the top female executives at the company and bring kind of a firestorm of hate and harassment towards her, to me says that he wants to humiliate the people that work there for whatever reason. And that, I think, is pretty poor form.
Yeah.
I also think that it says something about our society that you can have this vibrant public marketplace of discussion and ideas that can basically be owned by a private person to basically do whatever they want with it, which is basically what this deal implies. So nobody knows what Elon Musk will do or would do when he owns Twitter, but I think it's shows a lot of he certainly hasn't demonstrated a commitment to the ideals that Twitter has tried to operate on.
What about the relationship between Twitter and cannabis? Because Elon Musk has been somewhat public. Well, first of all, he keeps making these sort of 420 references in all the sort of a lot of the sales figures and the numbers that have been floated about always have this 420 reference in it, and I think he thinks that's very funny. I don't know Twitter's policy right now towards cannabis content. You probably maybe are more familiar, because a lot of the social media platforms are pretty restrictive when it comes to cannabis.
Yeah.
Is Twitter the same?
It can be. It can be. Not in, I follow a lot of cannabis accounts on Twitter, but you also have to remember that Twitter is an advertising driven platform and strives to be as much as possible a clean, well-lit place for brand advertisers, because that's 85% of their revenue is brand advertisers like Procter & Gamble and Unilever. It's a tough place to be. It can be a pretty mean and ugly place overall, just because somehow brings out the worst in humanity sometimes. So the decision whether to allow cannabis by these main platforms is seen in that light. Does it make it less likely that Tide detergent or Pampers wants to advertise on this platform? Right. I would expect over time that, particularly once things legalize from a federal perspective, that the platforms are going to take a different approach. What approach Elon Musk is going to take, I doubt he even knows what approach he's going to take. I don't know the guy, but his public behavior seems pretty erratic and pretty ego driven. And he's really great at getting attention. And I think he's one of the better P.T. Barnums of our time, but that's about as far as I think he's probably thought things through.
Right. All right. Enough about Elon Musk. Let's talk about Jeffrey Graham. How has cannabis enhanced your life?
It certainly has been a great industry to be a part of, meeting fine folks like you.
Well, I'm not that far.
And it's,
but thank you.
And I think, I grew up among people that grew cannabis and has been part of the social culture that I've been a part of. And I think it really brings people together. Sometimes when I look at the statistics and I see that whatever the estimate is, the 15 to 25% of people that use the product in the United States, I do think that there are more people that could really get benefit from it. And I do, especially when I talk to folks that are old or infirm. I have an uncle that uses cannabis to help sleep and to get over his pain. I really hope that more people can tap into the comfort that it gives people. And I'm glad that as I get older, I'll also be able to not only use it to enhance experiences like playing jazz music, but also to help me get through the day.
What do you think is holding people back? Is it the stigma? Why aren't more people discovering the benefits of cannabis?
Well, there's been 100 years of really solid propaganda against the product. I mean,
reefer madness. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and then people, there's still 40,000 people in jail for cannabis. So most people, I mean, it's amazing that so many people actually use it. It just shows about how wonderful the plant and is, that, you have all those people that are willing to risk jail time. Think about it. When you were in high school or college or as young adults, you knew you could be. I mean, I've had cop cars come over when holding a joint, and knowing that I could be in a jail cell that night. Of course, I got away with it, and there are other people that don't for obvious reasons. So it's illegal. Stigma is almost a soft word for the way it's been demonized.
Yep.
And people's habits have been formed around alcohol and prescription drugs and other things that cannabis is can be much more effective and safe as an application for things like that.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. If people want to find out more about Pistol Data, where should they go?
They can go to LinkedIn and see my name, Jeffrey Graham, Pistol Data. You say data, I say data.
Yeah, I was going to say data. What is the word? It's probably data. I just say data. I say weird things. It's my New York accent.
Oh, you're an intellectual.
I say one. Yeah. I'm an intellectual with a New York accent.
Or you can go to the website. It's Pistil, Pistil, data.com. Pistil is the female part of a flower, and so we named Pistil after a part of the flower because we're a cannabis data company.
I love it. To all the ladies in the house,
That's
big props.
That's right.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Awesome. Enhance Your Life is brought to you by Wana, the #1 infused product in North America. Wana's entire process is designed to deliver the same great experience time after time. They have spent years fine-tuning their recipes so that their products are delicious, consistent, and potent. For more information, head on over to wanabrands.com. That's Wana, W-A-N-A, brands.com.